Hello everyone. This week we're looking at Chapter 6 on emotional or behavior disorders, or EBD as it may be described, or ED at that point too. So you'll see the first slide has your homework for the week. Then I do want you to watch a video called Don't Give Up on Bobby. So if you'll go ahead and pause the video, go ahead and start out by watching the video on Bobby. That'll give you a good idea of a little bit about what we're going to be discussing today. All right, some of the objectives that you'll learn. One, you'll be able to compare and contrast the definition of emotional disturbance in the IDEA and the definition of emotional or behavior disorders by the Council for Children with Behavior Disorders. You'll also be able to list examples of externalizing and internalizing behaviors, identify factors that might account for disparity between the number of children receiving special education under emotional disturbance category and researchers' estimates of the prevalence of emotional or behavior disorders. You'll be able to describe major risk factors for behavioral problems in adolescence and adulthood, along with specify several screening and assessment tools for identifying emotional or behavior disorders, and state reasons why schools seldom use them. Name and give an example of 4 scientifically supported strategies for educating students with emotional or behavior disorders. And lastly, explain why there is more debate over including children with emotional or behavior disorders in the general ed classrooms than including children with other disabilities, and describing the greatest impediments to children with emotional or behavior disorders receiving the most effective education as possible. First, let's write down what you think when you hear the term emotional disturbance. Write down what you think about that term, and then come back. So go ahead and write those down. Very important right now. Just write down 2 or 3 things that you think of. If you're not done, just pause it. If you are, go ahead and click definitions of ED, and it'll bring up a YouTube video, and see how closely you match what they describe. I think you'll find it interesting. Well, now that you've seen 2 different videos, you've seen some definitions, let's look at the IDEA definition. One or more of the following characteristics displayed over a long period of time and to a marked degree that adversely affects educational performance. And that includes inability to learn, not related to other factors, inability to maintain or build satisfactory peer or teacher relationships, and inappropriate feelings or behavior under normal conditions, along with a general pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression. It continues to be a tendency to develop physical or symptoms or fears associated with personal or school problems. The definition does not apply to children who are socially maladjusted unless they have an emotional disturbance. The definition includes schizophrenia, and we'll talk about the socially maladjusted here in a couple slides. Emotional disturbance definition from DESI means a condition exhibiting one or more of the following characteristics over a long period of time and to a marked degree. Typically, that's more than 3 months. The term includes schizophrenia, but does not apply to children who are socially maladjusted. Criteria for initial determination of eligibility. A child displays an emotional disturbance when, through evaluation procedures that must include observation of the behavior in different environments and an in-depth social history, the child displays one of the following characteristics. So let's go down here. An inability to learn that cannot be explained by intellectual, sensory, or health factors. An inability to build or maintain satisfactory relationships with peers and teachers. Inappropriate types of behavior or feelings under normal circumstances, a pervasive mood of unhappiness or depression, and a tendency to develop physical symptoms or fears associated with personal problems. And that should have been remembered from the past one. Here's socially maladjusted. There's 2 such definitions. One, a child who has a persistent pattern of violating societal norms with truancy, substance abuse, a perpetual struggle with authority, is easily frustrated, impulsive, and manipulative. And that was from the Doe versus Board of Education of the State of Connecticut back in October 24th of 1990. It could also be a child who is incapable of fully profiting from general ed programs of the public schools because of some serious social or emotional handicap, but who is expected to profit from special education. So, it's one of those things that it's difficult. And I've included the Doe versus Sanders slide on the next slide. So go ahead and look at that. Let me rearrange this a little bit. There we go. Note from the DESI definition, manifestations of emotional disturbance can be observed along a continuum ranging from normal behavior to severe disordered behavior. Children who experience and demonstrate problems of everyday living, or those who develop transient symptoms due to a specific crisis or stressful experience, are not considered to have emotional disturbance. So many times as you look at these, there's been a little bit of differences of opinion. Some of the students that administration may think need to be served under special education for EBD, I think you can see are probably going to be in some of those other parts of socially maladjusted, and then there would not be a possibility of special education. I know the other ones, alcohol and drugs. If they are on alcohol and drugs, it's a hard thing to really take it down to just being a special education issue with those involved, and typically they do not get into evaluation at that point due to those other the factors that come into play with their behavior. Definition, some of the definition problems. Definition is vague and subjective to, what are satisfactory peer and teacher relationship? What does inappropriate behavior look like? The definition as written excludes children on the basis for why they are included. How does one differentiate between socially maladjusted and true emotional disturbance? Individual teacher expectations and tolerances make identification a difficult and subjective process. Some of the characteristics to primary behavior are external behaviors, which include noncompliance as a kingpin behavior around which the behavioral excesses evolve. Also lying, temper tantrums, stealing, property destruction, threats of violence or violence toward peers and or teacher. And the other one is internalizing behaviors. Too little socialization with others, overly shy or immature, withdrawn, hypochondria, easily upset and difficult to calm down. Then there's academic achievement, low GPA, 1 or more years below grade level academically, difficulty passing competency exams within their grade level, high absenteeism, at risk for school failure and early dropout, and reciprocal relationship between behavior problems and low academic achievement. And also, many have learning disabilities and or language delays are possible academic difficulties that are characterized by students with EBD. Many more children with EBD score below the means on IQ tests than do children without disabilities. Students with EBD are often rejected by peers and experience great difficulty in making and keeping friends. Less participation in extracurricular activities, lower quality peer relationships, and lower levels of empathy towards others. Students with EBD are 13.3 times more likely to be arrested during their school careers than students with disabilities. And unfortunately, I've seen that throughout my years in education, that does tend to be the problem. I know I used to have a video that discussed that a little bit more, but it's since been deleted. So the next time, let's go ahead and look at another video. This one here is how many are there. It gives you a little bit more idea about ED. So please go ahead and look at that video, and then pause this and come back to me when you're done. Then we'll talk about prevalence. Estimates vary for EBD. During 2012-2013 school year, children ages 6 to 21 years who received services under the category of EBD represented less than 0.5% of the school-age population. The vast majority are boys with externalizing disorders in the form of antisocial and aggressive behaviors. Some of the causes, you have biological factors, brain injury or dysgenesis, Genetics, temperament are some of those biological factors. There's also environmental. There's home, relationship with parents and inconsistent parenting practices, school, teacher actions, ineffective instruction, community. There's drug and alcohol abuse, gangs, deviant sexual behavior, and there's a complex pathway of different risks. Identification and assessment. The book talks about some I want you to look at further, but we'll start out with talking about screening tests. They're used to determine if intervention is warranted. Behavior rating scales or checklists are used. Direct observation and measurement. The actual behaviors that cause concerns are clearly specified and observed in the setting where they normally occur. Basically, you need to make sure and observe in different settings. Some students do well with some teachers, students don't. Get those structured and non-structured, get the teachers that they do well in, the teachers they don't, and then you'll have a good idea of the student in those different environments. So it's more observations than what we've been talking about before. All these are useful in that education planning. Identification, we'll talk about FBAs, functional behavior assessment. They're used to help understand the why of a challenging behavior. What comes first? What comes during? What comes afterwards? Talks about ABC recording. Knowledge of behavior's function points to the design of a behavior intervention plan or a BIP. Indirect functional behavior assessment and functional analysis are all discussed, and you need to go in and definitely look at FBAs and BIPs when you're talking about them there. Curriculum goals. Academic skills, direct and explicit, and effective instruction. Good instruction is the foundation of behavior management. There's also social skills, learning the social and non-academic skills that match teacher expectations. Instruction should include modeling of examples and non-examples, opportunities for role-playing. I know many times I did a social skills class, and we use a lot of role modeling, a lot of role plays. It helps the students get a visual perspective of what's going on, helps them with empathy, which is one of the other things they have difficulty with. But a lot of guided practice with feedback, strategies to promote generalization to the natural environment. There's also research-based teaching practices. Teacher praise. These kids need it. They already have enough in the negative, so any little thing should be praised. Active student responding. School-wide positive behavioral intervention and supports. There's a lot of schools that use these. They generally have 3 tiers. Generally primary prevention, secondary prevention, and tertiary prevention. You'll want to know this. We'll get to that here in a little bit, but you'll definitely want to know this. There's base teaching practices involving self-management and self-monitoring and self-evaluation. You need to be proactive, positive classroom management. You'll want to look at that a little bit further in your book. I've also used token economy or level system in some of the schools that we utilize to help the students get a better guide and a better gauge, and also as teachers getting a good documentation of how they're doing. Peer mediation and support. They talk about peer monitoring, positive peer reporting, peer tutoring, peer support and confrontation, and group contingencies. So be able to understand the difference between those as you're reading through the book on that one. I did include the correctional facilities and youth with ED percentages of students. This is from the 1996-97, but you can see that emotional disturbances are close to 45, 47%. SLD or specific learning disabilities around 43, 45%. So definitely take a look at that. I also have one here, video from, I want to say this from Britain, around there, but make sure and start at 1 minute and 28 seconds. You don't need to listen to everything before that. It's called Born Bad, and gives you another perspective, and I think a good idea of working with students that are EBD. Well, hopefully you learned some things from that video. We want to talk about fostering strong teacher-student relationships. You really do need to look at getting good relationships, getting that trust built with students that are in the EBD area, more than I think any other area. They do need to build trust with you and respect you for you to be able to work with them and have a good rapport with them. If they don't trust you, if they don't respect you, then you're going to continue to knock your head on the wall. So make sure that you're finding ways to connect with these kids even more than some of the others, just because of that trust and relationships. Differential acceptance: witness or be the victim of acts of anger without responding similarly. Empathetic relationship: recognize and understand the nonverbal cues reflective of children's individual needs. Focus on alterable variables. Help replace antisocial and maladaptive behaviors with socially appropriate behaviors, and acquire academic knowledge and skills. A lot of times, this class here, I had a fifth through or a sixth through eighth class. I actually had little gauges on their desks that would tell me how they were doing, so I could get an idea as they came in the classroom. Generally, you can see it though, but it does give you an idea of how they're doing before they get into the classroom. Here's where one of the major challenges is placement, is arranging an environment in which academic and social skills can be learned at acceptable rates while protecting the safety of all children. The CCBD does not believe that general education classroom is the most appropriate placement for all students with EBD. Support after the general class placement should include crisis intervention support plan and ongoing consultation and in-class modeling and intervention by a special educator trained to work with students with behavioral disorders. While I do agree with that, I think that you need to look at the individual. I also think that it's good for students with EBD to see good behaviors instead of being in a classroom with all students that just have EBD. That can be a difficulty for you. I do have a group activity. It might be good for you to look at. I have kind of got it to skip, but it talks about skills and inclusion a little bit more. It kind of gives you an idea of what might be on a test. I'll leave it in there. Challenges, achievements, and advocacy. Revising the federal definition of this disability so all eligible children receive needed special ed related services is a challenge. Establishing a national resolve and commitment of resources sufficient for large-scale programs of early detection and prevention. And then closing the gap between what is known about effective special education for students with EBD and what those students experience each day in the classroom. So read through that to give you a better idea of that. The next slide, what I've got on there is a link to go to the standards and indicators. There's 2 pages of it. I'm not going to go through it because I do believe you're college students, you can read it, but read through that. It gives you some ideas. Some of the items should look familiar because we've talked about it in the text, but that is what Missouri standards and indicators are for emotional disturbance and what an IEP team would have to say a student is eligible for all of those items in order to get that to work. Wanted to go through the assignments. So let me go back to that there. You'll read chapter 6. You will go over 6 PowerPoint slides, discussion board, take chapter 6 quiz, strategies for ED assignment, and also what's on there too is the interview is due. So make sure that you look at the interview is due October 6th, Sunday night. So please make sure and get that taken care of during the week. Let's also go back to the discussion board here. This one here, I want you to go through and tell me what you want to do with the FBA. So you're going to read 3 different areas about the FBA, and then pick one of those to give your opinion of what it is, your hypothesis. Just make sure it's a reasonable hypothesis and discuss 2 other students' hypotheses with them. So you're going to do your hypothesis and then you're going to read 2 others. And then at the end, next week when you're actually done with this, I'll give you the actual answers to that. And also there's a video demonstrating the attention function of toddler tantrums in YouTube. So go ahead and watch that to get you going there. I want to go ahead and pull up the course information here. Make sure there's nothing else that we need to discuss a later date. Make sure I've got everything on here we need to, that we're going over. Yeah, Chapter 6, discussion board quiz, ED. Actually, the interview should have been done already. That's what I get for doing these videos earlier. So the interview should have been done by the 6th, by Sunday. And this chapter here, of course, you're doing on October 7th. So really the only thing you have is discussion for 6, quiz for 6, and the strategies for students identified as EBD for this week here. The next big paper, I guess, is the autism paper due the 27th. But really you should, some of you I know are starting to get your observations in, so that's probably the primary thing that you're trying to get done now. Other than that, that is all that we need to talk about this week. So please let me know if you have questions, and I'll let you go.